Hey, welcome back to the About the Labor podcast here at VikingsTerritory.com. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy Drew Mahowald, and continuing on with our off-season coverage of just about nothing. Today we got a rather short agenda for you. Drew and I are going to talk a little bit about this Jimmy Butler deal because I think that's a pretty big deal in Minnesota right now. It's the only news that I heard today. Then we were going to do something on the biggest off-season addition the Vikings have made. Talk about our NFC North rankings once again, doing the safety position, rounding out that little segment we've been doing. I don't know what we're going to do next week to fill time. And then on top of that, we got to take 5 best video games of all time. But first, let's get the advertisement out of the way. Brendan Gay, local stand-up comedian out of Second City in Chicago. He's filming his first special at the Joke Joint Theater in Lilydale, Minnesota. It's Mendota Heights, St. Paul area. Make sure to get your tickets for that. You can get them at thejokejointcomedyclub.com or on his website, brendan.com, and use the promo code Brendan, all caps, to get 40% off your purchase. And we hope to see you there because I'll be there. It'll be a lot of fun. So with that, let's hop into some of this stuff here. Jimmy Butler, Drew, you're the resident Wolves guy on the team. Why don't you tell me a little bit about this guy?
Yeah, this is. I really didn't think Tom Thibodeau would pull the trigger here. This is a big deal for the Wolves. For a franchise that hasn't made the playoffs in 13 years, adding a borderline top 10 player in the league in Jimmy Butler. This basically makes them a playoff team by default at this point.
You'd hope so, right?
You really hope so, because if not, then you can legitimately say that this franchise is cursed.
With all the other franchises in Minnesota.
Right. Yeah, and I think the kind of the buzz around the league was that, the Wolves were interested in Paul George, Jimmy Butler, and that they were going to have to give up Andrew Wiggins to get one of those guys, and they found a way to not give up Andrew Wiggins, which they did have to give up Zach LaVine. And I'm going to miss Zach LaVine too, by the way.
High flyer, so much fun to
very,
watch.
Very entertaining, and from all accounts, a really just a good dude and a hard worker. So I think he'll do really well in Chicago. He seems to kind of like the big market, the big city.
I saw you tweeted something about that, how he has that kind of that big market personality. Yeah. He certainly has the big market flair. I'll give you that.
He loves the spotlight for sure. In that way, I kind of think that Chicago's probably better for him in the long run.
Do you think the Wolves will look back at this deal and possibly regret losing LaVine to some degree, given that he's kind of been a blooming player that has been developing his shooting game on top of the obvious athleticism?
Yeah, and the key thing you mentioned there was the shooting, because I think looking at the Wolves roster now, there's not a lot of perimeter pure shooters on the team. I think Nemanja Bjelica is one, but Wiggins is pretty average from 3. Carl he's pretty average, I'd say.
Butler's probably about the best one they have now, right? And they traded
Bjelica is probably the best perimeter shooter on the team. So I would assume Thibodeau's going to go get some shooters right now. But I think there'll be some instances where maybe they'd look back and think, LaVine would be nice to have right now. But what you're doing with Butler, first of all, Wiggins can now you can put Wiggins at the 2, which is where he excels, and have Butler play the 3, because I think he's better at matching up with the bigger, more physical players at the 3. And then defensively too, Butler, like a 3-time all defensive player. And that rapport too that he seems to have with Thibodeau already. I'm excited. This could be great.
I think it's interesting because you see Butler's trainer ripping the Bulls almost instantly, right? So.
And it's 4:00 right now in Paris, which is when we're recording this just after the tweet that was released. It's about 10:30 on draft night here. So, I think there's clearly some disdain between Butler, his people, and then the Bulls front office.
Which is interesting because you see a lot of. Remember when Thibodeau comes into Minnesota and we hear all these things about how agents have been pissed off at Thibodeau for running players into the ground, and now Butler's trainer is complaining about Chicago. So maybe it wasn't Thibodeau running players into the ground. It was someone in the upper management in Chicago, which is why Butler's excited to get to a different place altogether, but also rejoin the coach that really put his faith in him. And Butler coming out of Marquette, that's a guy that he was at Marquette my freshman year, so I really like Jimmy Butler. He was a very low key guy. I've been in the same place as him a couple of times. He was very nice to all of us. He was very humbled and lowball anyone. It seemed like that tomball mentality that he's been talking about his entire career kind of carried over to his persona at Marquette as well. He wasn't the guy that was, decked out in iPads and stuff like that. He always was very.
He came from a pretty humble background too,
right.
if I remember correctly.
Yeah, exactly. He was homeless and he had a lot of different things going on in his young life before he got a scholarship at Marquette. And I don't think a lot of people thought that he would succeed, myself included. I didn't see this type of ascension in the NBA. So
anybody did.
Great for him, and I'm thrilled to have him because if nothing else, you get a superstar caliber player to add to another superstar caliber player in Cat for sure, and then Wiggins is a kind of a borderline guy that will he ever get to that status? I don't know. That could end up being the differentiator between this Wolves team being kind of a good 6 seed for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, or maybe possibly a 2 seed at some point as these young guys continue to grow.
Yeah, and one thing too, I want to rehash one more time here before we kind of move on, because after all, this is a football show. Right. But Jimmy Butler and Tibbs, from what I've heard and he changed. And one thing I thought too was interesting. Butler changed his Instagram bio instantly.
Oh, right. I saw that too.
Tom Ball bringing Tom Ball to Minnesota forever or something like that, which I thought was cool. So I think there's a really good chance he signs another extension in Minnesota. I think he's got 2 more years left on his contract.
He seems to like the Midwest, so I feel like we can't he wouldn't be the type of guy to be complaining about the cold or whatever. Like I said,
right.
We walked to class. He walked to class like anyone else in Marquette, and it's freezing up there during the winter. So, and I've always thought that was kind of one of the reasons why free agents didn't like to come to Minnesota, just because you see a lot of guys react and they're like, oh,
yeah,
dirt.
For sure.
You know what I'm saying? So I think that's good, and I think it'd be great if the Vikings podcast, if the Timberwolves hold all 3 of those guys for the foreseeable future. I mean, this is a team that it looks about as good as the Timberwolves team has ever been. I mean, the one that I really can think of other than this group and this core is the Sam Cassell, Latrell Sprewell KG unit, which was really the only one that really rivals this. And we're not even talking about Ricky Rubio. There's still more things that could, more cards that could fall here. Exactly.
Yep. Before we move on, I'm gonna plug us in here. My canashoopas.com, where I do all my Wolves content and publish it and work with those guys over there. All kinds of stuff up there right now. So if you're into the Timberwolves, if you're into the NBA, go check out canashoopas.com. That's part of the SB Nation network. So I checked that out as a totally unbiased party. I think it's the best site on the internet for Wolves.
How about from an actual unbiased party? I'll plug them in and say that I really enjoy the Canis Hoopus work. That's I'm a very limited knowledge Timberwolves guy. I don't really care all that much, and part of that is because they haven't been to the postseason in so long. So you can consider me a fair weather fan in that accord there. But they do great work, and that's where I get my information. So make sure you check that out if you haven't already. I assume you probably have. Let's move on to Viking stuff, though. Biggest offseason edition, and the reason why we're using this kind of little segment here is because I use, when we're strapped for stuff to work with, I go on to Bleacher Report's Team Stream and check out what they're working with, because I think those guys do a great job of aggregating content for one, but on top of that, they have a lot of opinionated work that is very easy for us to kind of springboard conversation off of. And
to build topics off of.
Exactly, yes. So this one was by Gary Davenport at Bleacher Report. Biggest offseason edition, meaning every single guy that the teams have brought in this offseason, free agency, trades, the draft, anything you want. And Mr. Davenport listed the Vikings' biggest offseason edition as Riley Reid, the left tackle from the Detroit Lions. The Vikings brought in on the big deal this offseason, the one that kind of made the real shockwave this free agency period for the Vikings. I think that he certainly picked the safe option. The Dalvin Cook is obviously another great pick as well, I would say. There's a couple of other guys as well. What do you think, Drew?
I'm going to go Dalvin Cook here. It would be my pick anyway. And I think this isn't... It's weird because I really think Reif might be the most important, which is kind of bordering maybe... It's tough. It's a very fine line there, but... I think Reif is the most important just because he's not TJ Clemmings, and I think he'll at least bring that offensive line up a little bit in the rankings to maybe not the worst in the league. I'm always kind of cautious because I don't think Reef is quote unquote the answer, but I think he's serviceable, I guess is how I'd call him.
He's certainly flaws there. He's a better bridge than what we had at the very least. Right?
Exactly, right. So I think he's the most important in that Sam Bradford can stay upright for longer than 2 seconds in the pocket. But I think in the long run, Dalvin Cook is going to be the biggest addition just because of his star potential, that game-breaking ability he has, and the fact that the Vikings rushing attack was 32nd in the league last year. In a matter of a couple of years, just because of him, we could see that move up drastically. So I think Dalvin Cook is the answer here. But, I mean, I think for the 2017 season in particular, I think Reef is the most important addition.
Yeah, that's a really good point that you made with that timeline there. That was the same. You actually stole my thought here, so props to you for getting out ahead of this train. I was just going to say that the long term, obviously, I think Dalvin Cook is probably the better pick because this is a guy that's probably got 10 years in purple ahead of him, whereas Riley Reef
hopefully.
Hopefully you'd hope so, right? Riley Reef is a guy that 4-year contract. I mean, he could obviously be here longer than that. Will he be good longer than that? Offensive linemen tend to have interesting careers. You see guys that, like Nick Mangold, for example, a center that was very effective up until his mid-30s. You see guys like, I don't know, think about Vikings in the past year. There's Bryant McKinney before he got overweight, was very solid up into his his late years in the NFL. So, you even see like guys like Matt Burke, for example, leave Minnesota and go win a ring with Baltimore. So offensive linemen can have long careers, obviously, and that works. That could be the case with Riley Reef, but he's got less years guaranteed in front of him, in my opinion. So I think you can look at this offseason being a pick between, yes, Dalvin Cook probably next season isn't going to be a more important player to the Vikings because of that 3-headed attack they're going to be running, but over the next 10 years, I would say Dalvin Cook is probably the most impactful addition. I think that, we'll look back here and think that this was an absolute steal. I've been running my mouth about Dalvin Cook being
you have.
a generational talent for about a month or so now at least. So, I think that Dalvin Cook is the biggest long-term addition, like you said, but Riley Reef is certainly a guy that the Vikings really needed to stabilize that left side.
Yeah, I think. I mean, if you're looking specifically at 2017, I think it's Reef. And I think, too, we should add in Remmers here as well, kind of at least mention him, because I think looking at the Vikings offense in 2016 and the main issues and that those bookends were, it wasn't just Clemmings. I know he gets a lot of the attention for it, but Searles was not by any means.
Oh no, he was terrible.
Drastically better than Clemmings, and I know you know that. I'm not really talking to you.
I even out the Jeremiah Searles train there and make sure that everyone remembers what he did as well.
Yeah, I'm not talking to you because I know how you feel about Searles, but to the masses that listen to the show. So Remmers will be an upgrade there. Again, not a splashy player, not a humongous upgrade by any means, but it's definitely better, and it should stabilize that. And again, both of those guys are pretty solid run blockers, so that should help with Dalvin Cook and Latavius Murray and Jerick McKinnon as that run game hopefully goes from 32nd to substantially better, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, will it be a top 10 unit next year? Probably not. Maybe top 15 probably seems more reasonable. Realistic, yeah. So there is some take and give here with both those players because Riley Reef obviously he has the ability to inflate the value of Dalvin Cook. So if Reef plays well, you're essentially rising both their values in terms of us deciding who is the better offseason addition here for this, for the premise of this segment itself. I think that that's what's going to happen. I see Riley Reef being a very solid player. And I think that over the next 2 years, you'll probably think, that was a huge play by the Vikings and the biggest play of this offseason. But once you get into year 3, year 4, and you start seeing, the Vikings continue to revamp this offensive line, and you start seeing Dalvin Cook do things that most running backs can't do, I think that's when we'll start to think, well, all right, this was clearly the most impactful player that the Vikings were able to grab this particular offseason.
Right. And then I think we should also not forget Pat Elflein. There's another guy that potentially could be a 10-plus year starter in that interior spot, whether at center or at right guard. And that, if that ends up taking place, there's another candidate for this kind of award, I guess we're giving out as the biggest offseason edition of the 2017 summer. So. Yeah, and you got Elflein and also Dayton Jones in the immediate, in the short term.
You look at Dayton Jones as well, and Will Sutton.
Right.
I mean, Jaleel Johnson is a guy that you've spoken highly of as well. I mean, all three of those guys I think are in the mix. It's just it comes down to the Vikings needed offensive line and Riley Reif's upgrade, and then Dalvin Cook's ability versus the rest of this group, and it overshines some of like the ceiling for some of these players just because of those two aspects. So
I mean, it comes down to one ultra talented player, a top 15 talent in a draft class, and then simply being at the left tackle position, which holds so much value. Upgrading that the way the Vikings did. I mean, by default, you're going to be placed highly in something like this. So
you do. I mean, I think both of us have stated that we expect both Elflein and Dayton Jones and Jaleel Johnson to be important players for the Vikings over the coming years, particularly this upcoming season. As we see kind of what their roles look like. It looks like Nick Easton has the job for now, but I don't see that lasting very long. So, I mean, these guys could all be important cogs immediately. And this is a question that I think that it's like when you review a draft class, you kind of have to wait like 2, 3, 4 years before you get a full full image of what the picture kind of is going to look like in the future before you evaluate it. So we're doing this obviously a little bit early here, given that none of them have even played yet. But if we, a couple of years down the road here, I think that this offseason holds a lot of guys that could be important pieces moving forward.
On the flip side here, I'm going to pose a question. You're usually the one asking the questions, but I'm going to pose one. Who is the most impactful departure, or I guess... who will the Vikings miss the most of the guys that left? I'm trying to think off the top of my head who they all were.
We got Captain Munnerlyn, Matt Khalil. Those are probably the two biggest ones, right? You'd think in
Cordero Patterson, Brett Ellison,
Adrian Peterson.
Matt you couldn't even say Peterson with a straight face. Yeah. But Matt Asiata, there's another one.
Matt Asiata as well. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors there. Weighing this one out is difficult because I feel like the guys that Charles Johnson, by the way, is another one the Vikings lost. Weighing this out comes down to what the Vikings did to replace the guys they lost.
Yeah.
And so when you look at this,
I think the answer is easy for this one, personally.
I think it probably is too. So you lose Khalil, you get Reif. So I feel like the Vikings won that departure arrival dynamic. Yeah. You lose Adrian Peterson, you bring in and Matt Asiata, and you bring in arguably top draft talent in Dalvin Cook, and then also Latavius Murray. So I think that you neutralize that one as well. I would probably say Captain Munnerlyn, just because of the unknown with Mackenzie Alexander. I love Mackenzie Alexander. I expect big things from him, but I think the unknown right now makes him the most impactful departure because if he was still here, I mean, we talked about it on the last show, ranking cornerbacks. If he was still here, this cornerback group is as good as any guaranteed, lock it down because you've got Rhodes, Newman, and Munnerlyn on top of the potential of Trey Waynes and Mackenzie Alexander. You start thinking this is as good, if not better, than Seattle, Denver, pick your unit. That's why he's the most impactful departure in my mind. Yeah,
I think captain is the answer here. I don't think you think about it. There's a lot of doubts here with Mackenzie Alexander, and that's really the one position where of these departures where a replacement wasn't really addressed. It's just kind of you're expecting the next man up on your roster to take that spot, which, I mean, I understand it with Alexander and the talent he has and the projections for his career. But I think another kind of under-the-radar one, when healthy, Rhett Ellison. We talked about him so much as kind of a jack-of-all-trades, gets the job done in many facets of the game on offense.
You have to wonder with David Morgan, can he do the same thing?
Right.
It's the same type of ordeal as Munnerlyn leaving and not replacing him. You're trusting a young guy to replace him. Same deal with Rhett Ellison. So that question mark as to can they step up and do this versus we've seen these guys do it in the past. Now they're just integrating themselves into a new system. It's for you. I mean, the way that you break things down, the logic you use generally is just which move should I be less skeptical of. And a guy that has made impact in the league somewhere else and coming over is probably a better pick to continue at that level than a guy that you feel good about, but it's basically a projection with nothing really to fall back on beyond his college career. So especially from your vantage point, I understand why you're going with this, but just from a universal aspect, I think that's probably the safe play as well, given especially how big of a role player Captain Munnerlyn was with that in that nickel package. I mean, he was doing everything. Remember, he was coming off the edge as well. They were splitting up him and Harrison Smith, and that's probably something, by the way, that we don't know about Mackenzie Alexander. Can he blitz like Captain Munnerlyn could from that slot corner spot? That's something.
Did he even do that at Clemson?
I don't remember seeing
ever asked
nothing.
To do that? I don't think so.
Nothing substantial, at least. I think I saw that he had a couple pressures when I was taking notes on him. But for the most part, this is a guy that was known for his lockdown coverage, obviously, and that's why he was drafted. We don't really know anything about his ability to blitz, but we've seen guys like Eric Kendricks come in, who also had very limited snaps as an edge rusher, come in and integrate themselves into Mike Zimmer's kind of the way he coaches things, and have been able to have success there. So I expect to see that type of development from Mackenzie Alexander, but the unknown factor there, and just basing, we've hashed this out. We basically this is what it comes down to, and the slot cornerback position is probably more important than that move tight end position.
Yeah, that's exactly the point I was going to make. Is the slot cornerback role holds so much importance and value, especially with how heavy the Vikings run nickel, that if losing Reidell Ellison isn't that big a deal, because I think the Vikings, especially now without Shurmur, with Shurmur, as the offensive coordinator, there's going to be fewer of those multi tight end sets, because that was Norwich's thing, using 3 tight ends and stuff at a time sometimes. So. But I will say, if Morgan gets hurt or if Kyle Rudolph gets hurt, that tight end group is suddenly very, very thin. So it would be nice in that scenario to have Reidell Ellison available. But
absolutely. But the one thing I will say about Ricky Red Ellison. I was going to say Ricky Ellison because that's exactly the point that I was going to bring up. Is that I think it is nice to get Ricky Ellison off our backs. I'm kind of sick of him.
Yeah.
It's just because I feel like the Vikings have had a lot of trouble with just parents for some reason. Like Adrian Peterson's dad has kind of been a loudmouth too. Like it's nice to get both of those adults, and I say that kind of in quotations because they kind of act like children, it seems like. And I feel very funny saying that because so many people have said that to me as I was growing up. You're supposed to be an adult. You just quit acting like a kid. But this is what these dudes were like when they were in Minnesota. So it is nice to get those guys away. And given that Captain Munnerlyn came with only positive baggage as far as I was concerned, that's another little aspect that if you need an extra differentiator here, I'm not saying you do. I think it's, like Drew said, I think this is pretty clear cut that Captain Munnerlyn is the most impactful departure. Mm-hmm. That's it for me. I'm sick of those guys, and it's nice to have those loudmouths off of our roster as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you mentioned all the dads, and I thought of our ball at the draft tonight. So, yeah. I'm very glad the Vikings didn't deal with any of that. That kind of drama.
I still think he did end up with the Lakers, right? Lonzo?
He did.
So,
he did.
God, that's going to be something.
Of course it worked out that way.
Is basketball not turning into just a circus? Seriously? I'm not saying...
There's a legitimate case for those that think the NBA is rigged. For Lonzo to fall to the Lakers like that, number 2, it adds to their case.
Markelle Fultz, though, was the guy that went number 1 to 76ers, right?
Yeah, Philadelphia got it traded up for number 1 a few days ago.
Yeah, so that's gonna be, dude. The NBA. I'm not trying to be a dick here, but the NBA is the fact that you can say that as a guy that analyzes the NBA and be there's a legitimate conspiracy here. I'm not saying it's true. But the fact that we have to be wait a second, why does this keep happening?
Yeah.
Why does Kevin Durant get to go to Golden State, but Chris Paul can't go to the Lakers? There's all of these little things over the last decade, and the fact that all of that kind of stuff happens, and the reason why people love sports, and I think Colin Cowherd, for whether you like him or not, I think he does a great job of setting up this dynamic. A lot of people really like sports because of the realistic aspect to it, the fact that anything can happen. It's like real life TV. It's just not MTV. It's ESPN instead, and it's the ultimate show because you never know what's going to happen, and everything's at stake all the time. There's high standards. Everyone's kind of fallen in love with, quote, their character. And the NBA, the fact that you can kind of see some of this stuff coming, it lowers
whether
the
it's the playoffs and the fact that there's really two teams that have a chance every year.
Everyone
whatever
knew
the case
who was
is,
going to win. Yeah,
right. Yeah,
it's weird, and that's what I think. That's kind of for me why I've over time fallen in love with the NHL as my winter sport.
I mean, I understand it for sure, and I've always enjoyed the NBA a little bit more. I like watching the sport of basketball, and when the best in the world are doing it, I always enjoy it. And regardless if the game means anything, the Wolves are, this year they're 20-40 or something, but I'm going to watch them just because I enjoy watching that kind of talent.
And that's how I am with baseball. I've been watching the Twins lose since when they last made the playoffs. What was that, 2009, I think. I watch 81 to 100, anyone between 81 and 162 games every single year. I love my MLB.TV package. Highly recommended for any baseball fan, by the way.
Baseball's boring. Baseball's boring.
Exactly. Okay, so see, I love baseball like that, and then NHL and NBA had to pick between that dynamic, and that's what it came down to. But let's get back to some football stuff. I'm just going to name this the basketball episode because I feel like this is the most we'll ever talk about basketball on this show.
Yep.
So, biggest offseason edition is in the books here and departure as well. Let's get on to the NFC North ranks here. Cornerbacks we did last week. Vikings were on top in both our regards. We had a bit of a split dynamic according to what I've talked about with Drew ahead of time here, unless he changes his mind. But let's hear for safeties this week. Last NFC North ranking, got to be a good one here, and I think the Vikings have a case to be number one as well here. What do you got to say?
There's obviously some room for debate here. There's some pretty good safeties in this division, to be honest with you. I think it's definitely different from the cornerback group. There was pretty definitive rankings in cornerbacks, I think, for the most part. I mean, there's some tiers, but at safety you have some pretty solid players all across the board. So I have Detroit number 4, and that's kind of a strong number 4. You have Tavon Wilson, Glover Quinn, Miles Killebrew, all these guys. I mean, there's some talent there for sure.
Killebrew is probably the most intriguing piece.
He's intriguing for sure. Very much a wild card kind of. Yeah.
He is that money backer type, and having him in gives them an interesting dimension for sure.
Right. And I have Chicago number 3, and I know you really love Adrian Amos. And I was a big fan. Jones Quarty too, another kind of rock solid player, and then Clinton-Dix too. There's some playmakers there as well, and they just brought in Eddie Jackson too.
That's kind of the wild card. That's as big of a wild card as you're going to find coming off of injury, but based off of the film we saw, and I think we talked about Eddie Jackson quite a bit actually because the Vikings were looking at the safety position.
Right, and without the injury, I mean he's a surefire. I mean that's a ton of value with that.
He was as good as a box safety. Box safety meaning more strong safety type with very limited coverage skills as you were going to find. But with Adrian Amos, like you said, that guy can cover anyone. I think he's going to develop into one of the better safeties in the league if you keep watching him.
Right, exactly. So I had Detroit 4, I had Chicago 3. I have Minnesota number 2 here, and I think between Smith and Sendejo, especially Harrison Smith, obviously that's an elite player and arguably the best all-around safety in the league. Obviously, there's some arguments to be made there, but then Andrew Sendejo is also just a rock-solid, serviceable kind of partner in crime, so to speak, next to Smith. But then their depth there, it's easily the worst in the division. There's no one there to trust if one of those guys goes down. So I think that's why I have Minnesota 2 and behind Green Bay, who tops my rankings because Josh Jones, bringing him in, that's a very good pick. He's going to be a good player in the NFL. And then, of course, you have Morgan Burnett and Clinton-Dix, who are already studs. So, that group to me is the top group of safeties. So to recap here, I have Detroit number 4, Chicago number 3, Minnesota number 2, and I have Green Bay number 1 because of that trio really of Burnett, Clinton-Dix, and Josh Jones.
Yeah, I think you're making a really good case here, and I think Green Bay. Just to get him out of the way, 3 and 4.
Don't change your mind and agree with me because we agree.
No. We're not. I'm not changing my mind. I'm trying to figure out how I can poke a hole in your little the scenario you set up here. I'm with you on the bottom half. Detroit at 4, and Chicago at 3. The big thing with that is that Glover Quinn is very good. Adrian Amos is really good. It's the second piece of those two tandems that you raise question marks about. I think both Minnesota and Green Bay have a tandem that's very skilled on both ends, and we give Andrew Sendejo a lot of crap, but he's actually very good. He was very good in the single high look last year, cutting off that valve. He didn't allow any Andre Holmes stuff in the back of the end zone against the Raiders 2 years ago. That didn't happen last year. He seemed to develop into that very solid back end of the defensive guy. So it really comes down to, what do you like more? Clinton-Dix and Morgan Burnett, who is very, very similar to Harrison Smith in the box safety regard. I think Morgan Burnett is more of a floater, kind of a guy that you can use off of the edge, a guy that you can use as a linebacker, a guy that you can float back a little bit, but he's not great in coverage. So he's like Harrison Smith, and his stat lines actually look very similar as well. So Harrison Smith is clearly the superior player. I don't think anyone will tell you otherwise on that regard, but that comes down to, do you like Clinton-Dix or Anderson Dejo more? And I think that that's pretty obvious as well. I think Clinton-Dix has obviously set himself apart in that regard. He's become a very, very good zone safety in a limited amount of time, and he's kind of shifting that dynamic. A couple of years ago, we were thinking Alabama safeties were all crap, with Mark Barron kind of falling apart.
Right. Yeah.
All of a sudden, Clinton-Dix shows up. He's a great player in Green Bay, and then now Barron's become one of the better, one of the initiators of that money backer system out in, it would be Los Angeles now. So I'm going to stick with Minnesota at number 1, just because I do think Harrison Smith is the very best safety in the game, because he can do so much more than everyone. Earl Thomas might be the best zone safety. Cam Chancellor might be the best box safety. But the best combination of all these attributes, the guy that can really do everything at a very high level. You're splitting hairs with Harrison's zone coverage against Earl Thomas's. You're splitting hairs with his ability to kind of float around in the box as a run stopper with Cam Chancellor. I would say he might actually be better in that regard. So I'm going to say the Vikings are better, just because I do trust Anderson Dejo. The question mark is health and durability here. So Drew gets the edge for sure in that regard, because behind those two guys, we don't trust Jaron Kearse. We've made that very clear. Anton Exum has been a flash player that has looked very good as a kind of a playmaker over the years, but has never really been able to figure out everything, it seems like. Anthony Harris, I think both of us will admit that we really like him. I think you kind of have a bit of a personal interest in his career, because I think he was your first one-on-one interview as well. So, I do like some of these guys a lot, and I don't love the depth in Green Bay behind Josh Jones. So for that reason, I'm going to say the best safety on the best defense is going to end up being the differentiator here, and I'm going to give Minnesota the number 1 nod. I will say, though, it's getting weird that I continue to say that the Vikings are better than anyone, because I feel like I haven't said this many optimistic, nice things about the Vikings in a while.
That's a very scary hill to die on.
I know, right?
I guess. Yeah.
I've now gone linebackers, cornerbacks, and safeties is number 1 in the division for the Vikings. I'm pretty sure I ranked the entire defense at every level the best for the Vikings, which I'm fine with. I'm comfortable with dying on that hill, because I really, really like this defense. But I think we might look back on this podcast, and you could very well be right about the safety position, given that Josh Jones is so talented.
I'm confident that I'm right about it already.
We can readdress that at some point here. I'm sure that as soon as the Vikings and Packers meet up, we'll be talking about all of these things anyways, and breaking down the intricacies of that and what we had seen on film during the regular season next year, as we did last year. So this will be something we'll be talking about in the future here. But keep an eye on the safety position. Once again, there's a lot of great safeties in this division. We've now finished up the NFC North rankings, and I think that going through this list, as kind of a conclusion here, is there any major takeaways that you're getting for big takeaways that after going through this and kind of for the most part, there's not a whole lot of prep work that goes into this. We just kind of talk it through and kind of just decide on what we're going with. Is there any major takeaways that you have from here, or anything that you want to take back, anything that you've changed? Final thoughts on this segment that we've been doing here.
I think we should probably go back through kind of maybe for the next show, and we'll lay out all the rankings and kind of see, maybe give a GPA or something of all the teams. But I think you're going to kind of agree with me here, but I've ranked the Bears a lot higher in so many of the rankings than I thought I would, because that roster is really not as bad as it's perceived. And obviously that decision to trade up for Trubisky kind of gave the whole team and whole front office kind of a bad rap.
To pause you right here, just imagine on this point, because I'm going to make the same one, so to save some time, let's just emphasize this real quick.
Right. I agree.
I mean, imagine if the Bears don't take Trubisky and they just, for example, take one of the two safeties in the last class, Malik Hooker, for example. Say they take him, pair him up with Adrian Amison back then, and then in the second round they take a cornerback. Just say they give him Kevin King. That's instead of Green Bay. That seems to make sense in my head. Something like that happens here. Instead of Trubisky, and now you're sitting there with Glennon. Let's also say they don't get rid of Jay Cutler. This team looks pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
So that for me, that's my biggest takeaway here. As I look at this Bears roster, and the more I think about it, the more we talk things through, and kind of I hear your ideas and the ideas from our Twitter people. I think the Bears they're basically a good development period from Trubisky, him proving everyone wrong and really becoming a good quarterback, away from being 3 years down the road. Aaron Rodgers is on the back end of his career. I mean, we don't know what the Vikings quarterback situation is going to look like. This defense can't last forever. I mean, the Bears Ryan Pace might have actually subtly figured out a way to turn the division back in his favor a couple years down the road if fans are willing to be patient. Now, are they willing to be patient? Probably not enough.
If I know Chicago sports fans as well as I think I do, I don't think they want to be patient. But
I think Jimmy Butler could probably tell you something about that. So so
probably
I think that you make a good point here. That's something that we could probably talk about a little bit more on the next show here. But for my immediate feedback on that, my immediate takeaway is that the Bears are not that bad at all. So from there, let's hop into the take 5.
Yes.
This will
be interesting.
This should be a fun one. I tweeted this earlier this week that I've been thinking about this one a lot. Drew came up with it at the end of when we were kind of signing out at the end of last show here. Video games. Best video games that you have played. Some people love video games more than others. I happen to be someone that really, really likes video games. It's kind of my weird nerd thing, and I hate to say the word nerd and associate it with something because everyone's always like, they always use that word like, oh, it's my nerdy thing. I just like doing nerdy
and
stuff.
Associate it with yourself.
Yeah, I just think it's dumb. I think it's a dumb term. So I don't. If you're someone that uses it, this is my nerdy quality. But I really like video games. I think there's something for everyone in video games. Whether it's Dance Dance Revolution to get the chicks involved or something like that. I think there's something for everyone. So this should be fun. Drew, give me your top 5 video games that you have played.
All right, I am a sports video game player. Then I know from talking to you before, I know you're not that. So,
I like them to some degree.
I mean, you like them, but I know you're more enthusiastic about other things. So we're gonna have very, very different lists here.
Yes,
but there will be one on my list that I think you'll appreciate. But I'll start with number 5 is just the NHL games, like NHL 16, 17, whatever it is. And growing up in South Dakota and being completely a basketball person over hockey, I never would have thought that this game would intrigue me at all. But you start playing it kind of sparingly. I did in my freshman year, and as time's gone on, I love it, and now it's a great time with friends all the time.
One of the best multiplayer games, period.
Right, and it's always the one that people like at school. Going into school in Minnesota, it's kind of the game that everybody plays.
Yeah,
so
that was how it was for us too. We set it up so we would come up with teams of 4, and basically one dorm room was playing another dorm room, and we'd throw someone scores, and it was a fun dynamic. That's what I did the same thing in college, so I get it completely.
Yeah. I got number 4 is NBA 2K, the franchise. The franchise in general every year because it's so intricate, and the latest kind of this week, the NBA draft week, that's actually happening in real life. It's like duplicated so well in the My GM mode on NBA 2K. It just makes it fun, and then the realistic not only gameplay but kind of the features and stuff. I love it. It's so intricate, and I laugh that NBA Live is still a thing on EA Sports because it's not even close, the comparison, and I can't believe it still makes money. So. Number 3 is NFL Blitz. Love that game.
It was a lot of fun. That was one of my buddies in college. That was his go-to game. If you wanted to get something from you, Like if you wanted to like win something over you, like maybe for example you're debating who's going to pay for alcohol, it's like, all right, let's play Blitz for it then. And he was so good at it that he'd always win, so he'd always not to play him. I loved that game too.
Right. Yeah, I was it a couple years ago. I got it at a pawn shop for like $4 for my old PS2, and
there you go. Yeah.
I played it for like 2 weeks straight. So, just an excellent game, very entertaining, and it'll draw in the football crowd. If you're not,
you don't need to be a football fan.
That's one game that will draw you in. Number 2 is where I might catch your eye here with the track and field arcade game. Maybe people haven't heard of this before, but it's. To summarize it, you have to be able to move your hands and your fingers very, very quickly to make your guy run faster on the game. It's so fun. Me and my buddies played on New Year's Eve for several hours before going out. So I kind of fell in love with that game. I don't even have it, but I just know it's fun when I play it. And the number one game, video game for me, NFL 2K5 specifically.
That's with T.O. on the cover, right?
Yep, the one with T.O. on the cover, the one with Chris Berman in the game on the halftime shows, the post-game shows. And in the franchise mode, each week they would create a SportsCenter show with actual made-up highlights from around the league, which I thought was so cool. And of course, Madden and EA Sports bought out the rights to NFL games, which kind of sucks because I think Madden
monopolized
is not great,
it, and they might have gotten a little bit complacent, probably.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, ESPN NFL 2K5, definitely some fond memories, and it will never be forgotten for me, and I think for a lot of people, because it was way ahead of its time. So I'll recap it quick here. I had the NHL franchise, NBA 2K franchise, NFL Blitz, the track and field arcade game, and then ESPN NFL 2K5 is number 1.
Okay, so like I said, I've been working on this list for a couple of days here. It actually kept me, I told Drew earlier this week that it kept me sane while I was moving my dad out of his house into his new place. So if you know me at all, I hate moving things. So this was something I've been thinking about for a while here to keep me sane, and I came up with a list of 31 games. Like I said, I love old video games.
31
games. Yeah. And so while Drew was talking, I went through and I put X's next to 10 of them. So that's how far I could narrow it down. Obviously, this list is 5
It's called Take 5, not Take 10. So
Exactly. So I'll start with some honorable mentions here. First of all, Pokemon. If you ever played those games growing up on the Game Boy, that was the best way to pass time. Especially if you're going on a trip or a vacation that you don't want to go on and you're stuck on an airplane for 3 hours, nothing better than having your Pokemon video game in your hand. That was a bunch of fun for me growing up. Big fan of that. Donkey Kong 64, Mario 64, a lot of those Nintendo 64 games, just they have their own place in everyone's hearts. Super Smash Bros. Is another one. Those are all games that for me would rank somewhere on this list, but I'm grouping them together in order to save a little bit of time here and also not break the Take 5 rule. So to start off with number 5 here, a game I had a ton of fun with in high school and I haven't really played since, but Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. This is very specific because
that's a more modern game.
Yes, this is very specific. This is a game that I played with my buddies over Xbox Live when Xbox Live was huge and it's kind of its peak. We would get 16 different guys on there, and everyone would be trying to nuke. And so if you played these video games before, they have what's called a kill streak reward. So if you kill a certain amount of players without dying, you get to call in some kind of crazy thing, like a chopper gunner, a helicopter, or whatever. Or I think one was like an AC-130 or something like that. And then there's the tactical nuke if you got 25 in a row. So this was a ton of fun for me and my buddies. So that comes in at number 5. Number 4, a game that my friends will not play with me anymore because I'm just too elite at it. I will beat every single person. I don't care who you are. I don't care who you are, where you're at. If you can come up, you can try. If you can beat me in Mario Party, I mean, you can have what you want. Take what you want from my life because this game is I'm undefeated. I will not be stopped in that game. Mario Party, one of the most fun. Specifically the Nintendo 64 ones. This is something we did in college as well. Had a ton of fun playing that, and I'm just absolutely incredibly dominant at it. And now for number 3 for me is Madden. I'm a huge football fan, obviously. I'll tell for people that are younger and kind of interested in how you gravitate towards this field and how you acquire the knowledge necessary to talk about football on the fly, whether it's on a radio show or a podcast or something like that. For me, a big factor was just playing Madden. You learn so many players, salary cap hits. I mean, you learn a bunch of different things, like where guys are associated, what the dynamic is on their team, how important their role is. I mean, there's a lot of things you can learn from Madden, and if you go a step further and start creating playbooks and stuff, you can become very good, very tactical when it comes to game planning and stuff, and that kind of thing translates to when you're actually watching the game. So that's where it has a special place for me, both in that regard and because I just obviously love playing it. But Madden, for me, the most fun is just creating a franchise. I love doing that and just seeing it develop over the years. Love doing that. So Madden comes in at number 3 for me. And now you're kind of going to see the intriguing side of my my video game love here. I'm going to pick Paper Mario as my number 2 here. If you ever heard of this game, it's similar to the Mario games that everyone knows, the Super Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine, all that kind of stuff, but it's flipped into kind of a 2D world, and it sets up a role-playing dynamic. And so this is something that I really liked playing. I love playing story modes, that kind of stuff, and I love narratives. Obviously, that's kind of how I became a writer, so I'm a big fan of this game. This was my number 2 favorite of all time. And number 1 for me, one that I imagine only the biggest video game fans in the world are going to know, it's called Earthbound. And the easy answer to what this game, how you can relate to this game, is if you ever played Super Smash Bros., which I imagine most of you guys have, Ness, the character, the psychic kid that shoots electricity out of his head, that's the protagonist of this game. So lot of fun, ton of fun game, and kind of a number 1. I'm going to cheat a little bit here. Gauntlet: The Dark Legacy. Most fun I've ever played with my friends. We would sit in a very dark room. We would literally close up the windows, put like shades over them, and set blankets up and stuff, because it's this very creepy game with a bunch of spellcaster magic and crap and weird stuff like that, like orcs and things like this. And we would darken the room and like just create this really just ominous atmosphere and just have a hilarious time, and we'd stay up really late doing it. So that's one of my favorite memories with some of my very best friends. I feel like our friendships actually developed from playing this game because of how hilarious of the time it was and how frequently we played it. So that one has a special space in my heart. So there's 6. Cheated because I had to cheat. So that's my video game.
Okay. Wow.
Lust.
I think this may have been a bad idea. I guess we'll see how. We'll see how the listeners react to whatever that was, 10 minutes of just straight talking about video games. Both of us. I think we're both like nerds in our own way. So.
Sam brought this up too, that the way that what makes this part fun is that if you do like listening to like the weird aftermath stuff, like the personality quirks of us and like listening to that stuff, then you have this at the end of the show, or you could just cut it off right when the sports stop. I think it'll be interesting to see how many people straight up want to just cut this thing off before we start talking video games. But at the same time, it's kind of a cult. If you like video games, if you're a video games guy, you really love video games. So it's kind of culty in that way. So hopefully we can attract that crowd as well.
We should hold a poll maybe on Twitter or something to see which Take 5 people prefer, because we're going to find out quickly what type of video games are more popular, the kind of science fiction / Super Mario ones like yours, or like the straight up sports ones like mine. So
yeah, I feel like most adults, funny here how I'm supposed to be the adult of the two of us here, but most adults tend to like the sports video games, the Halo. I love Halo, by the way, as well. That kind of stuff. And then there's the kids, the people that kind of live like kids, I guess, or still act like kids, like me, who like stuff like Zelda, Mario, Bomberman. Anything.
Well, what surprised you had Madden on there, though? That surprised me.
Dude, I love Madden. I really do. And if right now I only have a PlayStation set up, a PlayStation 4, and the only games I have for it are Madden and then this what's the most recent MLB game?
The Show.
The Show. Yeah, I have MLB The Show, Madden, and then I also have this game called it's a new Banjo-Kazooie type game. I can't remember what it's called, but anyways. Yeah, so it's a lot of fun. So anyways, that's about it for the show. If you are still here, make sure to check out Brendan Gay's website, BrendanBeanGetBrendan.com, so you can get yourself a 40% off ticket using the promo code Brendan on his upcoming special held at the Joke Joint Club in Lilydale, Mendota Heights area, Minnesota, my home base. So make sure to check that out, especially if you're a lover of comedy. I think he does great stuff, and this is a guy to watch. might be an amateur now, like a lot of us. And Drew and myself are amateurs as well. So if you like our work and you trust our opinion on other people, Brendan Gay is a guy to check out and watch his rise. This is where it starts with his special on August 10th. So make sure to check that out. And Drew and I, we apologize for being one day late. We will be back on our Tuesday-Thursday schedule next week. One of the two of us, I'll let you guys take a guess on who made the mistake here, might have fallen asleep early yesterday, and that's why the show was not up for Thursday. So we apologize for that, and we'll be back to regular time next week, so look forward to that. And with the NFC North rankings done, nothing to tease in that regard, so we'll have something new next week lined up, and have a nice weekend to everyone, and we will catch you later on next week.